Hello there, lovely to see you. It's John here. Welcome to this week's book club, and we're a day later than usual making this video. And what's really making me smile is that I've had emails already this morning going, or messages on social media as well, going, "Where's the book club? Where's the book club?" So it's really lovely that that you're enjoying these. And it's kind of spreading around the world. And as I was telling you at the end of last week's video, from the new year, Bradford Literature Festival are starting an online book club, and it will be based around what we do here. So we'll have a kind of an even greater reach that way. So it's wonderful. It's also really wonderful that the YouTube channel is kind of growing slowly and steadily. And I think there's like one or two people joining every couple of days now, and I'm in no rush to get big numbers, or I'm not even trying to get numbers on the YouTube channel. It's a very strange mixture of things. I know it's only going to appeal to very certain people, such as yourselves, and weird combination of books, journaling stuff occasionally, meditation, spiritual and sacred reflections. I mean, it is what it is. It is what it is, and we are who we are. So let's get on with it and talk about this week's books. And I found this week very interesting indeed. I decided to do things a little bit differently, so I did a single author profile. So all of the work was by one author. And the day before the group, I was so excited. I was tweeting about it and messaging people about it, not saying who the writer was. I like to keep it as a surprise. The reason that I don't reveal who the writer is and what the stories are and what the books are in advance is because, that chattering mind of ours might go, oh yes, well I like that, or yes, I don't like that. So, I won't be bothered. And the way that I'd like to guide the book group is to kind of move past that kind of first impression way of doing things and actually just kind of meet what we're looking at that day and see what arises from that, So the writer in question that I was getting very, very excited about is somebody who, if you've done a literature MFA or a literature MA in the UK, if you've done a creative writing degree, there's no way you won't have come across this person, and that's Raymond Carver, whose short stories in the 70s, particularly, just changed the landscape really of what was possible with the short story. And so I was like a kind of bouncy little boy, kind of with these stories, and we actually looked at two stories because these stories are very, very small, very short. Two stories from this book, Will You Please Be Quiet, Please? And of course I'll post a link for the book down below so that you can pick it up if you want to. And we also looked at two of his poems. I don't know whether we'll cover all that in this little video in any kind of depth, but his collected poems is called All of Us. This is a US edition. I don't know if it's available in the UK. I would hope so. I will have a look when I finish making this video, and if it is, again, there'll be a link down below. And we looked at the poem Happiness and the legendary poem, the tiny, tiny little poem, Late Fragment. So I arrive thinking, this is going to blow everybody away. And I couldn't decide sort of which story to read first. I was so kind of excited by things. So in the end, I plumped for the second story in the collection, which is called Neighbours. And Neighbours is the story of a kind of lower middle class American couple. If you've lived in LA or you've seen kind of films from that period. This was written in 1976 or published in 1976, and you've seen films from kind of around that time. you'll know the kind of two-story apartment block sort of thing with the stairs going up the middle, and people are kind of, okay. They're okay, but it's kind of, just ordinary people. And Bill and Arlene Miller, they're kind of happy as a couple, these two. They're happy together, but they kind of feel a bit kind of left out of the world. And the two people who live next door always seem to be going away on trips, and Bill and Arlene kind of can't quite figure out how they manage to do this all the time. But it's usually connected with the husband next door's work, it seems, and they're always going off having these adventures. And this time, even though they seem to get on well, this seems to be the first time that the neighbours have said to them, will you take our keys and look after our flat for us? The plants need watering every day, and can you feed the cat, please, a couple of times a day? And of course, they say yes because they're good neighbours. And off the next door people go. And then kind of what unfolds from there is largely through Bill's eyes of him kind of going in to feed the cat, but then maybe looking in places that he shouldn't look, and looking in the fridge. I don't know if you've ever looked after a neighbour's house and kind of gone in the fridge. Maybe you can tell us in the comments below if you have. And kind of, he finds himself kind of having a bit of the cheese. Anyway, he finds, a half pack of cigarettes, and he takes the cigarettes, and he kind of ends up spending longer and longer over there, even beginning to try on some of the clothes, both partners' clothes. So, and it doesn't tell you at all what is being thought very much. It's just this kind of very simple sort of, it's all told in specific detail. It kind of reminds me of French modernism, actually, in a way, how everything would be done through specific detail, and yet through the specific detail you understand the underlying emotion. Then Arlene too, of course, starts going across there, and she spends her own time over there, hours at a time, and they find themselves perhaps wishing that the couple next door don't come back. I won't tell you any more, but I'll read you a little bit now, and then we'll have a look at Fat.
Inside, it seemed cooler than his apartment, and darker too. He wondered if the plants had something to do with the temperature of the air. He looked out of the window, and he moved slowly through each room, considering everything that fell under his gaze. Carefully, one object at a time. He saw ashtrays, items of furniture, kitchen utensils, the clock. He saw everything. At last, he entered the bedroom, and the cat appeared at his feet. He stroked her once, carried her into the bathroom, and shut the door. He lay down on the bed and stared at the ceiling. He lay for a while with his eyes closed, and then he moved his hand under his belt. He tried to recall what day it was. He tried to remember when the stones were due back, and then he wondered if they would ever return. He could not remember their faces or the way they talked and dressed. He sighed, and with effort rolled off the bed to lean over the dresser and look at himself in the mirror. He opened the closet and selected a Hawaiian shirt. He looked until he found Bermudas, neatly pressed and hanging over a pair of brown twill slacks. He shed his own clothes and slipped into the shorts and the shirt. He looked in the mirror again. He went to the living room and poured himself a drink and sipped it on his way back to the bedroom. He put on a blue shirt, a dark suit, a blue and white tie, black wingtip shoes. The glass was empty, and he went for another drink. In the bedroom again, he sat on a chair, crossed his legs and smiled, observing himself in the mirror. The telephone rang twice and fell silent. He finished the drink and took off the suit. He rummaged through the top drawers until he found a pair of panties and a brassiere. He stepped into the panties and fastened the brassiere, then looked through the closet for an outfit. He put on a black and white checkered skirt and tried to zip it up. He put on a burgundy blouse that buttoned up the front. He considered her shoes, but understood that they would not fit. For a long time, he looked out of the living room window from behind the curtains. Then he returned to the bedroom and put everything away.
Okay, so just to conclude with Neighbours, actually, before I share the next story with you. So I shared it with the group in all my enthusiasm, and the thing I found about reading Carver out aloud is that it's actually very, very difficult to read out loud, because he uses very short sentences, very clipped, heavily punctuated, and all this specific detail, and in fact fat, which is coming in a second, is completely in speech. It's not got any description in it whatsoever. And reading out Neighbours, I was expecting this kind of, for a kind of a moment of silence, and then people to kind of be so enthusiastic, and I don't think they liked it very much. I think maybe having heard it read aloud, it's very, very hard to take in. There's such a Zen-like quality to Carver's writing that I feel that when you sit with the book, that kind of there's so much space in it because of this specific detail that you kind of find yourself kind of sitting there afterwards, sort of pondering the almost kind of spirituality of ordinary lives and the meaning of ordinary life. And that's the thing about Carver. It's ordinary people in ordinary lives, their jobs, their friendships, their relationships, the little kind of things that go on between people. Yeah, and so it's very hard to kind of give you kind of what the group made of it. There was kind of bemusement, perhaps, at this kind of story, and they did enjoy the kind of naughtiness of kind of going next door and some of the objects that had been found. But in terms of kind of how the story works, I think it's a story that you have to kind of return to and kind of sit with in the book. So it's one of the times where I felt that having heard a story read aloud wasn't the best introduction to it, actually. So it'd be interesting to see what you make. And then we moved on to the story Fat, which is the first story in this collection. And when I did my literature masters, this was one of the stories that I kind of got most excited by. Although I knew Carver already, I made it a point in the days when I was a writer to kind of to have kind of read what I needed to have read. And Carver's one of the writers who gave me permission to write about very ordinary things. And in the story Fat, we don't know the main protagonist's name. She's a waitress. She works in a diner, and she goes over to see her friend Rita, and she's telling Rita about something that happened a few nights ago or the night before. And she's working, it's a Wednesday night, and the fattest man she has ever seen comes in. And she's just sort of surprised by the size of this guy. He's kind of like, she describes him as being, his hands as being kind of 3 times the thickness of regular hands. And she describes the other people in there as well. And what's interesting is how everybody else who works in the restaurant, the diner, says something horrendous about the guy. But he's on her set of seats, so she goes out and she starts talking to him just to kind of take his order and see what he wants. And he has this very particular way of talking, which I won't quote to you now, but perhaps will appear when I make the little reading. She kind of accepts him. She kind of accepts him in just a very human sort of way, but nobody else does. They fall into, it's a bit like kind of a 1976 version of Twitter, in that all you get is reaction. You don't get any kind of human heart in it. You just get, he's fat. Oh, he's so fat. Oh, he's this. Oh, what it must be like serving that guy. And he orders a lot of food. He does order a lot of food. But there's this little loving, almost, dynamic between them. And our waitress's boyfriend also works there. I think he's the grill chef. And so when they go home that night, he just still slagging off this poor guy. Still slagging him off. And because of this kind of honest meeting, something in our waitress begins to change, and she begins to reflect on her own life. So I'll read you a little bit of this.
Good evening, I say. May I serve you, I say. Rita, he was big. I mean big. Good evening, he says. Hello. Yes, he says. I think we're ready to order now, he says. He has this way of speaking. Strange, don't you know? And he makes a little puffing sound every so often. I think we will begin with a Caesar salad, he says, and then a bowl of soup, with some extra bread and butter, if you please. The lamb chops, I believe, he says. And baked potato with sour cream. We'll see about dessert later. Thank you very much, he says, and hands me the menu. God, Rita, but those were fingers. I hurry away to the kitchen and turn in the order to Rudy, who takes it with a face. You know Rudy. Rudy's that way when he works. As I come out of the kitchen, Margot, I've told you about Margot, the one who chases Rudy. Margot says to me, Who's your fat friend? He's really a fatty. Now that's part of it. I think that's really part of it. I make the Caesar salad there at his table, him watching my every move. Meanwhile, buttering pieces of bread and laying them off to one side, all the time making this puffing noise. Anyway, I'm so keyed up or something, I knock over his glass of water. I'm so sorry, I say. It always happens when you get into a hurry. I'm very sorry, I say. Are you all right? I'll get the boy to clean up right away, I say. It's nothing, he says. It's all right, he says, and puffs. Don't worry about it. We don't mind, he says, and smiles and waves as I go off to get Leander. And when I come back to serve the salad, I see the fat man has eaten all the bread and butter.
So there you go. And the group had a bit more to say about this one. The meanness really stood out, the meanness of people, and the kind of the bigotry, and we just found ourselves very much on the large man side, you know, and people just really like the kind of the simple, honest setting of it. And again, with Carver, he doesn't tell you what to think, and so his way of kind of using detail leaves a huge amount of room for the reader. So it's another one of those stories where, you know, I invite you to kind of just read it and then kind of sit quietly looking out the window for 5 minutes or 10 minutes, you know. It's one of those, it takes time to kind of sink down. We really loved that it was completely in speech, that there was no description whatsoever, that all the work was done in this sort of, you know, somebody telling a story sort of way of doing things, and that the use of the detail was so rich, and yet it wasn't overly done. It wasn't just like endless lists of things. It was just kind of vivid, absolutely specific, absolutely showed you what was there, detail. And the group really enjoyed that very, very much. We did look at some poems. As I said, we looked at poems from All of Us, which is the kind of the collected Raymond Carver. Basically, unfortunately, Carver's not with us. And Carver's own story was of great interest to the group as well, in that, you know, he was in quite a bad way. At the time of writing this, he was drinking a lot, and you know, kind of struggling really, but his kind of work was the kind of the focus. And then he meets his kind of wife to be, Tess Gallagher, at some point, and the tone of the writing changes. He becomes much happier. He stops drinking, and you know, no one thought he would live very, very long, and he ends up living maybe another sort of 10 years or so, and we end up with more stories and more poems. So he actually had a genuinely, you know, fulfilling, happy relationship with his wife. It kind of seemed to work both ways, and you know, and yeah, his poetry is again rooted in the ordinary, the ordinariness of things, and the ordinariness of people, and the importance of our ordinary lives, you know, and how valued we are, and his own life. He didn't leave himself out, and so we found the poetry to be, because it's not edited as hard, because it hasn't got this, still got this really simple quality to it, but it hasn't got this, this kind of really kind of cut to the bone sort of editing like the stories have. The poems are actually perhaps more accessible. Yeah, and he reminds me of Bukowski actually, and he also reminds me of I don't know if you've listened to kind of early Tom Waits, but if you listen to Nighthawks at the Diner, yeah, have a listen to Nighthawks at the Diner, and there's some kind of similarity there. I think Waits kind of takes a lot of clues from Bukowski and from Carver actually, but that is a very good album. Okay, it's kind of probably, I think, his best. I'll put a link for it below, and you can have a listen and see what you make of it yourself. Okay, so I shall see you next week, hopefully, and please subscribe to this channel. If you're not a subscriber, please give us a thumbs up, because if you like the videos, it gets sort of recommended more, and then more people get to see it, and then more people can read the books. And please leave a comment down below. Have a look at these stories, sit with them, see what you think, and see if you can talk about them, because they're actually very hard to talk about. And yeah, I'll see you next time. Take care.
Late Fragment by Raymond Carver. And did you get what you wanted from this life, even so? I did. And what did you want? To call myself beloved, to feel myself beloved on the earth.